Welcome to reInvent 2020. Thank you for joining us in this unique time. I wish we could have been all in person, but we can't. And I'm sorry I don't get to meet you in person. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you're doing well and hope to see you next year. Imagine for a moment that you're being asked to migrate workloads to AWS, migrate things to the cloud, and bring them in such a way that you can get to operate them and move across. Whether that's you as your idea and your project, or being asked to by your business leaders. What does it take to establish the right foundations to make that happen, so that you can be confident in what you've deployed and that it makes sense? My name is Sam Elmalak. I am worldwide tech leader for Cloud Foundations. And over the last few months especially, we've been working on that idea. What does it take to establish the right foundations? And if you stick with me, by the end of this session, we'll talk about the things that you need to think about, the capabilities you need, the reasons to implement them in the way we recommend, and how to build the right foundation, including the account structure and the things that you need in that space. So you've decided you want to migrate something. Well, congratulations, welcome aboard, we're here to help you. Up until recently, in my mind, I kept thinking, let's just copy it over, move it, and that's it. 3 weeks, we're done. Why does it take so long? And as we started to look into this, we started to figure out how long does it actually take. Does it really take 3 weeks, or is there more to it? And I'm sure for those of you that have done this before, you're probably laughing at that idea. And we're here to talk to you about what the foundations are. I'm assuming that you've already gone and figured out your business drivers. And what we typically see from customers that are moving to AWS to migrate certain workloads, it's everything from digital transformation, maybe a merger and acquisition, cost reduction, outsourcing. But the main one we'll talk about here is the one that's closely tied to data center consolidation. Whether that's a few racks in a server room somewhere or an entire data center. That's the focus of this session. Those kinds of workloads. What are the right foundations for it? Everything else can address other cases, but we'll focus on those. So the common questions that come up are, how do I create the business case? What do I have in my environment? What should I move? We'll focus just on the how do I get started and how do we manage those workloads in the cloud to get to a meaningful outcome of production workloads and things that we have out there. So what do I do? Typically, the customer journey starts from assessing what it is. What is it that we have? Whether it's discovering what we have, some workshops through immersion days, mobilize to discover and plan what you have, build a business case, identify the skill sets and things that you need, implement the landing zone, the operating model, the security and compliance, and eventually migrate. Again, we're going to be talking about the landing zone portion of it, the operating model, the security and compliance aspect of it. Those three are the things that help us establish the foundation. The skill set will come in as part of the capabilities that we implement, making sure the right skill set is there. And that planning comes on board as we identify what those are. And if you've done IT for some time, you probably know that to pull this off, I need things like access management, change management, automation, configuration management, incident response, support, reporting, and so on. We won't cover every single one of these things, but we'll follow along our capabilities-based model to figure out what are those things to consider, which ones apply across the board. So the first set of areas we have is governance, risk, and compliance, identity and access management, service management, security management, networking. We've put a team together over the last few months to figure out what are those areas that we need to work on, how do we help you establish those, and what are the considerations around them. And if you look at the diagram to the right, you'll see that from a maturity perspective, from a scale perspective, you can see you don't necessarily have to be a 5 in asset management, because more than likely you're doing that already on-prem today. So as we start with governance, risk, and compliance, it's that overarching thing. It's a board-level goal, CEO-level executive decision. Somewhere there is a set of governance and risk and compliance, whether that's through regulatory or because you are serious about security and things that you need for your customer, or just simply because you are a company or an operation that wants to make sure you've got the right governance model. So within that, we've identified the set of capabilities. Immutable environment log storage. As you think through your environment, what happens? What are people doing? Being able to have the set of logs and things around them in a place that's secure, that is unchangeable, and available for auditing purposes down the line. Whether that's through a regulator or because you want to know what happened and when it happened. From a resource isolation boundary, you've got a set of resources. We want to isolate them somewhere so they don't interfere with one another. Financial management. How much am I spending? If you made the business case already, how do I show that that business case is reflected in what I've deployed? Did I overspend? Did I underspend? Greenlighting services. An overall governance capability, which in the beginning will likely be its own function that focuses on getting things out there, focus on defining what the right governance model across everything that we have. But over time, that size of the function may shrink, but it becomes a key part of every other capability. For example, if I'm doing immutable environment log storage, how do I prove that it truly is immutable? Are there tests in place? Then we've got vulnerability and threat management, as well as records management. How long do I retain the data? If I'm a regulated industry, whether I'm financial services or healthcare, there's typically some kind of a requirement to store the data for a certain amount of time. What does that look like? How do I retain them and meet that? Once I've defined these things, well, how do I connect to this environment? How do I make sure that my applications that are sitting on-prem can still communicate? And we found that divides into 4 categories. You need to be able to connect applications from on-premises to AWS, whether that's through a VPN or a direct connect or a partner. Those are all available options. Interconnecting resources in the cloud, what you have deployed with us. Does it connect well with one another? Can it communicate as needed? Ability to connect to the internet, whether it's to serve your end products to your consumer. So whether you are a news agency, perhaps like a Reuters.com, or you are a shopping site like Amazon.com. How do you serve your end customers so they can have access to data? And for updates and patching. You might use a NAT for updates and software patching, but have a direct internet gateway with some reverse proxies to establish the serving of content to your customers. But the fact is, in order for you to do any kind of meaningful migration, there has to be some kind of a network. Even if it's internal systems, you may skip the internet for end consumers, but you have to have the on-premises connection. And that could be through transit gateway and VPCs, but you've got a number of options there. But ensure that we've got the right capability. And then how do I connect and log into those systems? We've identified that to do that, you need access to the AWS environment itself. So whether it's logging into the AWS accounts directly or logging into AWS services, as well as being able to establish human level access and programmatic access. People coming in, people leaving, people switching teams. And programmatic access, whether that's through console, as your developers issue commands, or instances. So this is to the AWS environment itself, our services. Then the instances, EC2 instances, virtual machines that you defined. What's the operating model there? How do I connect to them? Again, if you're doing a migration of the type we described, which is bringing servers over from an existing environment, almost a lift and shift type scenario, minimal changes, you likely have a process for doing that already. Follow it. Make sure that you continue to operate that model. If there's something that you don't like about it, we can think about a change at that point. But given that it's a lift and shift, it's almost an extension to your data center, setting that up out there and having that existing model will work. The new thing you may have to do is the AWS access. And we still recommend that you have that be federated, use your existing identity provider, but it's just something new. And finally, application level access. You deployed an application, perhaps you're a banking company, and to log into the banking software, what does that look like? So you've got 3 levels of identity. Then to manage all of this, how do we manage the services around it? So we've got security and incident security incident response. What happens if something does go wrong? Whether it's somebody forgetting their password, or somebody accidentally logging into the wrong machine, or hopefully not, but a malicious actor. What happens if there's a security incident response? So in the crawl stage of something like this, manual runbooks. Let's ensure that we have them. Ensure that the security teams are trained up to handle events and incidents in the cloud. I've run across scenarios where customers may have deployed a number of workloads, but the security team aren't enabled to know how to respond if something does go wrong. So ensuring the right tools, the right training, the right skill set for the security side for an incident response. As well as forensics. If there is an investigation, something does go wrong, how do I provide the evidence, collect the data, and aggregate the logs? And again, that might be an initial simple policy at first or a runbook, and over time we automate it. So part of this model also for the capabilities, considering the crawl, walk, run around it. What does it look like to get started? What does it look like as we grow into it? And what does the run stage look like? And the run stage tends to come in more handy as we modernize and build applications. But it's another stage to think about as we're building things. Rolling back, rolling out the software. What if something goes wrong? How do I roll it back? So rolling it out as well as rolling back. With the cloud, it allows you to do things such as getting the entire infrastructure spun up in a parallel environment. And once you validate it's good, you can switch to it. If it's not, just keep running what you're already running. Centralized template management. What are my golden machine images? And again, for a lift and shift type scenario, that might be as simple as just simply using what you have today. If you're using VMware, you can use the VMware Cloud. If you're using something else, you can import the images as is. But it allows you the ability to have that central place to manage those things and operate them. And then once we've managed the services, the security management, security operational capabilities. How does our security team go in and build things to protect and secure our environment? Networking, the firewall rules, the network security, as well as application security. So thinking about it holistically. Again, for a lift and shift, you likely have certain application security protocols you have in place. We'd likely move them as is. From a network perspective, there might be some changes given the virtual networking nature of AWS. But again, if we treat it as an extension to a data center, we're moving workloads there as a lift and shift, it can minimize that amount of work. And one goal out of this session is, what does it take to do that lift and shift type migration? What is the initial foundation to make that happen? Knowing that in some cases, we'll continue to do what we do today. And for the data, how do I protect it? Making sure that the content and the data we have meets the compliance requirements and the security model you've defined. That includes encryption. So the key management policies, and generally recommend you use KMS, our key management service. It's integrated with a number of services. If you have an existing solution that you use today, you can use that as is and bring it over, or continue to host that on premise and make use of it the way you've done it in the past. With KMS, you potentially have the opportunity to transparently add encryption in cases that you don't have. For example, enabling disk level encryption at the EBS volume. So you can take opportunities as we're doing the migration to enable some of those security controls that have no impact on your application code itself. And secrets management. Those databases, those instances we talked about, the passwords to them, whether it's programmatic or human access. How do we manage those secrets? And then from business continuity perspective, the disaster recovery. If something does go wrong, how do we recover from that? Your objectives around it. How do we build that and make it happen? So another one of those capabilities we need to consider is the disaster recovery. And directly related to that is backups. How often are we taking them? How are we archiving them? And again, if you're using AWS as the migration place and you have existing backup policies or software, let's bring that as is. If it's on-premise today, we can work with you to make sure it's integrated. If it's something that's got an equivalent in marketplace, let's work on making it in the cloud so it's available for you to do the backups. Again, the goal is to minimize the operational changes to establish such an upgrade. And then from an asset management perspective, being able to search across those, the metadata, the tagging strategy, ensuring that the cost center, for example, is tagged. What kind of environment? Is it production? Is it pre-prod? Is it a test environment, managing all the resources and inventory management around them, making sure all that falls under the asset management. And once again, if you're doing a lift and shift, you may be able to use those things. So the intention behind this list isn't to tell you go and change everything that you've done. It's to point out, here are the things that we're identifying as things that we need to go through. And in some cases, the answer might be, I've already done it. I have that on-prem today, and therefore I can move forward with it. Then the last three, change and release management. Patching. What happens when I release something? What happens when there's a CVE or I need to patch a particular piece of software? So rolling back, backup, and deploying is also a subcomponent of that. But the patching around it. Centralized monitoring and logging. How do I make sure I have the things that I want out there? Ensuring that my logs and the monitoring around it is available. And finally, the developer experience. There's been a few instances where we've worked with customers, and the central cloud teams, for instance, will go in and build an entire environment and try and take advantage of the fact that we're moving to cloud to fix some of the existing practices that may not necessarily be the most secure. For example, choosing to remove developer access to instances. The problem with that is if I remove it without producing a mechanism for developers to troubleshoot things, it becomes less useful. And in some cases, I've seen development teams decide I'm not going to use the cloud because I can't troubleshoot or access anything. So ensuring that the developer experience is considered as part of this will enable them to succeed in developing things and building and deploying and helping manage and troubleshoot issues, but also reduces the burden on the central team that's managed this and operations. So to do all of these things does take a good amount of work. And one key aspect of getting that built is the underlying AWS environment structure that we set up. Within AWS, we've got this idea of an account. An account, think of it as a resource container or a resource isolation boundary. So back to that capability we discussed. What is the isolation boundary that we put around a set of resources to make sure that they meet what we need and achieve our security outcome? So let's talk about that account structure. One of the key things we can do within that is being able to disable a certain level of access. So we've got this idea of organizational units, and we can organize a set of accounts into an organizational unit. And on them, we can apply policies. So I can disable all access for an organizational unit that's designed for suspended environments, for instance. So I can disable, I can set up resources, I can specify conditions. And the organizational units give me that grouping. But one key thing to consider is it's about the policies and not the internal corporate structure. So how likely is that group to need a similar set of policies? And if I can identify that, then I can move forward with it. So this structure is intended to focus on that model. So we start with AWS Organizations Management. It's a service that allows you to manage these accounts, provides you organizational units. So the AWS Organizations Management account is that top level. For those of you that have been with us for some time, that used to be the AWS Organizations Master account. We've renamed it recently to become the AWS Organizations Management account. So hopefully that helps reduce confusion, if any. That is the place that hosts that source of truth. The accounts are all sitting under it, and it should be a highly structured and highly organized place, owned and managed by people responsible for the security of your company and your assets and your environment. So your consolidated billing goes there, minimal resources, limited access, and make sure that that role that gets created in sub-accounts is restricted. Once we've done that, there's the foundational organizational units. These are the things that we need as building blocks for our organization. It's security and infrastructure. And under those, we'll have prod and a pre-prod type thing. We've called it SDLC here, but you can call it pre-prod. You can also split that out into multiples. Pre-prod, alpha, beta, depending on whether you have policies that are different or not. If you don't, there would be no need to split it out. But we definitely recommend having a production one that we're calling prod in this context. And we're intentionally keeping the hierarchy short to reduce the operational burden when you try and troubleshoot issues. When we start with the security one, back to that capability of immutable security logs and the ability to be able to search through what I've done. We're recommending an account called the Log Archive account with a single S3 bucket, one or more rather, to store security logs. CloudTrail, your security logs, it is the single source of truth, and nobody should ever be logging into it. In fact, we recommend no tooling, maybe minimal tooling that alerts on certain things, but no tooling runs in that account. That's the central source of truth. Back to that governance and risk and compliance heading that we have. This enables us to have the immutable security log, and it also enables us to have the source of truth. So if I need to audit this environment by a regulator or for internal reasons, it's sitting there and it's available. From there, to help enable the security account, the security team. These are a set of accounts that enable them to manage the environment. They're generally owned by the security team, enable security operations, and again, very limited access. That's the read-only, the break glass, and the tooling. The read-only is the day-to-day account. Review and view and scan resources in other accounts, exploratory security testing, cross-account read-only, so be able to access and view what's going on in a read-only manner, and that is key here. It's not there to break things, it is not there to try and change things. It's to view and explore things in a human basis. More than likely you have tooling that's doing that, and we'll talk about that in a second, but this is the read-only access. If something does go wrong, back to the idea of incident response for security. How do they respond to that? The approach is to have an account that's a break glass account. If there is an issue and I need to go address it, I go into the security break glass account and go do that. And we prefer just-in-time access, should almost be never used, extremely limited access, of course, but it's there to help us respond if there's an incident or an event. Owned by the security teams, continue to move forward that way. The next account in this environment is the security tooling account, the place where we host those tools and things that we need from a security perspective. The things that we run, things like guard duty, security hub, config aggregation, it's intended to host those tools in an automated way. Things that run and are always checking things. Now, humans might need to have access, and they might need to access dashboards and things within that environment. And the way they do it is have the minimum access to go in and view those dashboards. But the tools and automation is running there to help enable us to check the environment, validate. So for example, I might have a tool running to scan for all security groups that are open on port 80 to the world. That's available and it's an option. You may end up splitting that account into multiple accounts, depending on what you're running. But the idea is you've got somewhere where those security tools are running. And in fact, many of these things can be split into multiple accounts over time as you grow and do things. Once we do this, we've got shared services. So common tooling, things that are DNS, LDAP, Active Directory, golden machine images, and so on. Again, for the purpose of a migration, they may not necessarily be the things that you need. You likely have things on-premise today that you use and just have direct connectivity there and make use of it. We're introducing it as a concept so you're aware of it. Then from there, the networking. Back to one of those key capabilities, the networking. Being able to host a transit gateway, for example, in a network account. Your direct connect would be connected there. So that enables you to establish that connectivity and getting things up and running. Or if you've got a shared VPC that gets distributed. Again, for the purpose of a migration, you may have a single 1 or 2 VPCs and have everything deployed on that because you're treating it as an extension of a data center as opposed to a modernization play across the board. And because the team that's managing the infrastructure is likely the same that does it on premise, as opposed to individual application teams operating in a DevOps-like manner, a smaller number of accounts is likely sufficient. From there, the sandbox. Somewhere we need to play, experiment. Unlikely, your first few accounts are things that you will test. Things that you want to try out. In fact, the first account you ever set up will end up being a sandbox account over time. And again, spending limit, experimentation, playing around. From there, we switch into workloads. That's where things get hosted. They will get hosted in this workload environment. We want to match your development lifecycle and think small. And if you're a modernization play or if you're trying to bring things across, each one would be owned by a certain team focusing on a specific area. But again, for migration purposes and bringing that data center over, we want somewhere to experiment and try things out. A pre-prod environment as well as a production environment. So the pre-prod, that might be the place where we test the tooling and things we'll put in place to enable the migration to happen. And perhaps move the first few workloads to make sure that it works. And ultimately our production environment. And that's where we move the workloads. Now you might have existing processes today that you use for deploying software. And that's okay. We can make use of them to directly migrate from on-prem to the production once we've figured out what those processes are. And pre-prod becomes the place where you're figuring them out. But if you've got existing deployment processes that works and manage to sufficiently deploy the tooling that's needed to make that, we can do the move to prod. And pre-prod becomes the place to test that tooling, make sure that it all works and functions together. And it, of course, will be connected to your data center, host your production applications, and promote it from pre-prod, or as we described, pre-prod on-prem or in AWS. So that gets us to this basic starter framework that helps you establish this. And as a migration thing, you may not have the shared services account up front, for example. You'll likely have the network one, or perhaps if you're doing everything out of a single one, maybe the network gets bundled in the production one. The sandbox, you're going to be playing with those anyway to learn new things and experiment and understand how it works. And then the workloads themselves, that's where things will go in a migration perspective. The overall picture ends up looking like this. Now, for a migration, you don't necessarily have to worry about everything else that's there, but over time, this becomes a process. So security, infrastructure, those two we've already discussed. That's where we're hosting our foundational things. And then we've got Sandbox on workloads, a few others to consider: policy staging, as I'm testing service control policies. Where do I test them? Where do I do things around them? The suspended account, suspended OU rather, that's where things that we've suspended, accounts that we're closing down that we no longer need, go and sit. That's a denial policy. We'll skip individual business users for the purpose of migration, but in a nutshell, it's when I have access to an individual business user to try something out. And perhaps it's just access to a simple S3 bucket. Exceptions and deployments may not apply, but we wanted to make sure that you understood this is the high-level view that we get to. But this is over time. For the purpose of a migration, that starter framework should be sufficient. And in fact, a few of the accounts here you may not need to create. However, I still recommend that you create the OUs to model the structure out. And within the workloads is where your migration would go. The scope of an account might be bigger because it hosts more applications, but it allows you to do this. And as mentioned, this is a journey that takes time, even for customers that are starting out. So what does that mean as we establish the overall environment and foundation? We need to look at it holistically. What's the process? What are the capabilities that we need to establish that outcome, to build the right foundation? So not only can we deploy and migrate our workloads, but over time scale and add other things. Make sure we've got the right monitoring in place. Look at the capabilities that we need to establish to make that happen. What are those capabilities? How do we map them to existing things that we have on premise? Or potentially building new things that we need. Scope down the capabilities to the migration need or this particular use case, which is a lift and shift. And we'll see that in a little bit on the next slide. As well as the operational model. And having been somebody who came from a software development background, I used to think of operations as the team that slows me down because I'm sitting there waiting for servers. Having worked with customers to help them migrate and move things to AWS, what I've come to realize, it is one of the most critical things that we need to have. If security is job zero, or if security is the highest priority, operations is job 0.5 or the second highest, or possibly equivalent. But the idea is we want to make sure that we can manage our solutions, be able to operate them effectively. And if something does go wrong, or if something just needs to be dealt with, we've got an operational team that can manage and handle it. So we need to look at it holistically, think about the capabilities of what we need, scope down to the migrations need, and build that operational model. And to give you a checklist that you can work from, here's the set of capabilities all summarized in one slide. The ones highlighted in orange are the ones that we believe are critical and you need to focus on as you're building a migration. Because there might be differences here from what you have on-prem. Some of the other ones are likely things that you've got mechanisms around on-prem today that you can continue to use and leverage if you build it the right way. So immutable environment log storage. You likely want something like that in the cloud, hosted in a log archive account. Your identity and access management. Some of it will be different to access different kinds of resources. Account isolation, or resource bound or resource groping isolation. How do we make sure that that's the right way? Central network connectivity, again, establishing that between AWS and your on-prem and to your customers. Financial management. You may not necessarily have to do the centralized one just yet because you haven't gone in a big, broad spectrum, but certainly making sure that financial management there. Disaster recovery and backup, ensuring we have the right plans and policies there. Does the backup go back to on-premise? Are we closing that data center? Should we make a second backup in AWS so that happens, or a way to fail over? Making sure we have a tagging strategy. I know of customers that years after they've started work on AWS still don't have resources identified to the appropriate owners because they were done before they came up with a tagging strategy. And it could be initially limited to the migration, as well as governance. What are the governance, risk, and compliance things that we need to have in place to move things to the cloud? Here are some resources that you can look at around migration. You can look up some of our pre-existing reInvent session. We have a whole session, SEC 325, from reInvent 2019, last year, where we talk about that entire account structure, if you're interested in more details, or go to any of these links to help you address that. Thank you. And thank you for being with us this year, and hope to see you in person next year.